All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ed Recker. Uh, I am the Director for High School Relationship Management with Sallie Mae. I am joined this morning with by my colleague Melanie O'Halleck. Melanie is a Director of School Relationships with Sallie Mae. She just jumped on to wave hello to everyone. And we are representing OASFA this morning. And what we're doing is going over Financial Aid 201. So for some of you, most of you, you probably have a pretty baseline understanding of financial aid. What we are going to be doing this morning is just taking a little bit of a deeper dive into some very specific topics regarding financial aid. So thank you again for joining us, and some housekeeping tips. We are recording this session. So this will be available on the OASFA website, probably within about 48 hours of the session being over. So we'll get started here. So just a little bit about OASFA and this presentation. So OASFA is a nonprofit organization, and it is comprised of financial aid professionals. A specific subset of OASFA is the Outreach Committee. So Melanie and I are both part of the Outreach Committee, and we are an all-volunteer committee. So we try our best to be a primary resource for you all, for school counselors, for admissions professionals, really for anyone who has any questions about financial aid or needs help with financial aid. Everything we do is free. So the information you're getting today is free, and you can absolutely distribute this. However, we do just ask that if you do want to distribute it, you just contact us at outreach@oasfa.org to make sure that it's okay. Generally speaking, gang, it's okay. I mean, we do this because we want it shared. We just want to make sure that we're aware of it, and you just give us the green light. A couple of other housekeeping tips before we get moving on this. So we do want to hear from you. If you would please, if you have technical issues, please put those in the chat. Otherwise, there should be a Q&A button to ask questions. If you're not seeing the Q&A button, yep, if you click on, I believe it should be there. I'm seeing it. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. If you have technical issues, please put them in the chat. And we are also joined, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce her either, Veronica Davidson with Sinclair Community College. She will be helping us with Q&A behind the scenes. But again, if you have questions, please drop them in there. We'll be happy to address them. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. So we're going to start off with FAFSA completion numbers. So all of these numbers are derived from the U.S. Department of Education via the National College Attainment Network, so NCAN. So nationally, we are looking very good compared to 2025. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind. So actually, let's go through some raw numbers first. So the class of 2026 is 36% ahead of the class of 2025 at this point. So that's a very good thing. We're seeing a lot of great gains. I would note that the percentage is high in part because the forum opened last year later. So last year it didn't open until, oh my goodness, I believe it was right around Thanksgiving. I think it was mid-November is when the FAFSA opened. This year it opened early, as some of you all may know. It opened in really late September, so beat that October 1 deadline. So it is a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison, but net we're still well ahead. So almost 500,000 more FAFSAs have been filed this year compared to the same time last year. So definitely a good thing. Definitely a good thing. So when we start looking at this for comparison purposes, like I said, it opened a little later last year. The tracker does include submitted and processed numbers from the beginning. Uh, the year before, there was a processing lag. So again, that can make up for some of that difference. And both of these do include data from the beta testing period because realistically, the beta test was just they opened it early. They called it beta testing because they didn't necessarily open it up to everyone immediately. All of those numbers are included. So anyone who participated in beta didn't have to redo their FAFSA. Students have been receiving FAFSA submission summaries since beta testing began in both years. And colleges have also received their ICERs since beta began both years as well. So they've been receiving the FAFSA information even during beta. You know, and that last bullet, I smile, I laugh. I think anyone who's lived this knows it. We have come a very, very long way since 24-25 FAFSA. I think everyone can acknowledge that was, I think rough would be an understatement. But thankfully, I think like any new process, by and large, all of those wrinkles have been ironed out. And what we're seeing this year is really, generally speaking, a very smooth FAFSA process, really what I think the Department of Education envisioned when they labeled it, oh boy, better FAFSA early on. So yeah, we're in good shape. So let's talk a little bit more about national tracker data. So as of February 6th, so keep in mind that any data we have is always going to be lagging a little bit. You know, they have to wait for it to actually be completed, compiled, and then at that point, really kind of really digested so that we have good information to put out. So as of February 6th, 41.8% of the class of 26 has completed a FAFSA. Again, this is fantastic. This is light years ahead of last year. So 36% ahead of FAFSA submissions compared to last year. And the NCAN FAFSA tracker, so this is what I referenced earlier, is comparing processed FAFSAs from both years as of January. So early on, they compare submitted and then they transition over to processed. Processed is probably a better indicator just because it says that's a completed FAFSA. It doesn't have any issues. It's been processed and pushed out to the schools. So FAFSA tracker does compare date to date, and it also compares not only with last year, but with the class of 23. That's important because we know the challenges of the last 2 years of FAFSA and when it opened up. 23 was the last year, the last most recent year where the FAFSA opened on or around October 1st. So if we look at that, we're still 10.5% ahead of the class of 23. Again, fantastic information, fantastic news. So this is really just a graphical comparison as to where we are and where we compare. So this is straight from the NCAN FAFSA tracker. It's a great tool if you're ever curious as to where we are nationally or where we are as a state. You can always look that up. If you go to ncan.org, on their dropdown, they have its FAFSA tracker. And Bill DeBon, their data guru, he updates that every Friday. Usually it's updated every Friday afternoon. So he updates it weekly. It gives fantastic information. And I'm going to focus more on the graph on the right. As you can see, it's comparing 25 or where we're at compared to both 25 in the blue and then 23 in the orange. So again, based on that late open last year, we're still way ahead of last year. But even when we look at the class of 23, we are looking very, very good in terms of 9.7% ahead of completed. All right. So let's transition to more locally. Let's talk about Ohio FAFSA numbers. So the country is so far ahead of where we were last time this year on completed FAFSAs, and we're on track to have an extremely high FAFSA completion rate in Ohio as well. Ohio's ahead of the class of 23 and 25, but keep in mind, and you all being school counselors, you know this as well, we still have a long way to go. So the country is behind on FAFSA submitted compared to this time last year, actually, just the raw number. However, the country is almost 23% behind on completed FAFSAs, which translates to hundreds of thousands um, of FAFSAs. So actually, gang, I'm sorry. I think those notes are incorrect. We're actually showing ahead. I'm not sure. I think the notes weren't updated. So I apologize there. A little bit of a Ron Burgundy moment for all you Anchorman folks there. So actually, we're doing very well. We are doing incredibly well compared year over year. So definitely good things. Now, if we look at the FAFSA tracker itself, so where do we compare versus other states? Now, I look at this and I take it with a grain of salt. So when we look at where we rank in terms of the states, we did key in those where Ohio is because the tracker only goes out to the top 15. So Ohio ranks 20th in estimated FAFSA completion uh, in terms of the class of 26. So we're 20th. We have just over 41% of the class of 26 that has completed a FAFSA. Now, I throw that out there with a little bit of a grain of salt. When we look at all of the states that are ahead of us, and I believe those that have an asterisk beside them, those are states where it is a graduation requirement to complete the FAFSA. So this is why I say take it with a grain of salt. If Morley Keller were on here, she'd sit there and pound the table and say we need to do better. And I tend to agree. We do need to do better. But I would also say, look, gang, we don't have a legislative backing mandating FAFSA requirements. So over 2 out of 5 seniors at this point have completed the FAFSA. When we think about the fact that only about 6 out of 10 or 3 out of 5 go the route of post-secondary, I'd say we're doing pretty good. We definitely have some work to do, but we can do that. That's not an issue. Similarly, when we look at the percentage year-over-year percentage change, we rank 37th in percent of the percentage change. So we are still up 9.4% year over year. Definitely a good thing. Or actually, I'm sorry, we were 28.3% up year over year and 9.4% up compared to 23. Both very good. The ranking doesn't really reflect that, in my opinion. It's showing 37th. But again, we also have to keep in mind there are states that have those FAFSA mandates and states that have really a more structured and formalized FAFSA completion program nationally. So again, we've got some work to do, but I'm not going to sit here and say we're doing poorly. All right, so we've talked a little bit about where we are and where we've come from, which again, I think it's a great story. Let's get down into some of the changes or some of the more nuanced things when we talk about financial aid. So we're going to start with FSA ID enhancements, which really there is a lot to celebrate here. I think this is a great story. We know that every student and every contributor, which is really a parent and potentially the parent's spouse, must have a studentaid.gov account, which is formerly known as the FSA ID. So I will say a lot of times financial aid professionals, we're going to use these terms interchangeably, especially during this transition period. So if you hear studentaid.gov account or FSA ID, please know they are one and the same. Those are the same thing, but the Department of Ed is kind of transitioning that naming convention. So if you hear studentaid.gov account, it is for those who have hairlines like me or have been around a while. I like to say the artist formerly known as FSA ID. Little Prince drop there. So this is used to log in and complete the FAFSA. uh, and also used to sign the form. So oftentimes people ask why they need this. Well, gang, it is essentially an electronic signature for federal forms. You absolutely need this if you're going to do the FAFSA. And there are also recent enhancements to make this process easier, faster, and more user friendly. And we're going to talk about those in just a little bit because, hey, these are all fantastic. And what they've done is allowed us to really reduce and in some cases eliminate barriers to FAFSA completion, which is something we're all striving towards. So basically, they've made it easier to create the account. So there are fewer steps and there are fewer screens. It's a shorter and clearer process. It's gone to 6 pages and 12 required fields instead of 23. And I think we all know in this case, shorter is better. The fewer questions that students and families have to answer, the more likely they are to complete the process. Challenge questions, backup code copy confirmation, and duplicate fields have been removed. So again, we're reducing the number of fields, number of questions, reducing those barriers. It also asks the user to identify a preferred language at setup so that hopefully that eliminates another one of those barriers, makes the user a little more comfortable. This used to be at step 4, and then they had to restart the flow. So again, didn't make a lot of sense. The Department of Ed listened and made those changes. Also, users can copy and paste data from their password manager. This is, it sounds low key, but it really is important because this is one of those things. I don't know about y'all. I use that password manager. And sometimes, especially if, you get that little pop-up that says use a secure password, I mean, are you going to copy that down and remember that and make sure that you transcribe those 25 characters correctly? I hope so, but then what happens if you lose them? So this is a big deal. I think so. Again, relatively low key on the outside, but I think it's a huge thing and helps a lot of students and families. And also users can reuse phone numbers previously owned by other people. Previously, if the phone number was on file, there were big challenges with that. Now, if the user has a number that was previously used, as long as they can successfully retrieve the verification text, so again, two-factor authentication is required. If they can retrieve that text and plug in that MFA code, that phone number will then be associated with their account. So again, nice win to make things a little easier. And that process for account recovery has also been simplified. So those are the enhancements we've had on studentaid.gov account creation. The art is formerly known as FSAID. So we're going to move forward with verification now, and we're going to give just kind of an overview and what this all means. So verification, students may be selected for this process. And really all it is it's a process where colleges confirm the FAFSA information is correct. It is required by the U.S. Department of Education for a subset of FAFSA filers. Now, this is something that it can be random, or the Department of Education does have algorithms that if someone if the potential is there, based on the information they've provided, they're going to select them for verification. So again, selections are made either by the federal processor, so again, Department of Ed, or individual colleges can say, hey, something doesn't look right here. We need to verify this information for the student. Contributors, so students and parents who successfully transfer IRS data through the Future Act Direct Data Exchange, or FADDX, are much less likely to be selected for verification. Reason being is that's pulling all of that tax information over directly from the IRS. It is automatically verified that, hey, this is valid information. So a lot of the financial information almost all the financial information is being pulled over. So as long as folks use that, and candidly, there are very few options for them not to use it anymore, that should greatly reduce their likelihood of being selected for verification. So some of the things that schools can request documentation to verify: income and tax data, household size, and then special circumstances, which we're going to talk about and go into more detail in just a little bit. Verification must be completed before aid can be finalized or dispersed. And this is important. Some schools will send tentative aid offers when verification is still pending, especially for incoming freshmen. But the aid cannot disperse until verification is completed. So I really want to stress this because for years I worked on the school side, and we would do this. We would send tentative award offers to students, and candidly, we needed to do a better job of communicating that it was tentative, not only initially, but throughout. So if a student comes to you and you see that, please reinforce to them that this is tentative. Action is still required, because from a school perspective, there are few things worse than a student showing up first day of class or on move-in day and their aid hasn't been finalized. We'll hustle, we'll do everything we can, but the reality of it is that's tough. It's tough for everyone involved. So more about verification. So who's selected? And I alluded to this. FAFSA data may be flagged due to either inconsistent or conflicting information, missing or estimated data, or a high likelihood of error based on federal criteria. So those are those formulas, those are those algorithms working behind the scenes by the Department of Ed to really kind of identify, all right, are there inconsistencies? Is data missing? Or is there a high likelihood based on federal criteria? Some of the best practices for verification for students and families is we always ask if they have access to their college portal, check it regularly to see what their verification status is. If the student is selected for verification, respond quickly. Even if it's initially like, look, I received this, and if they're having issues getting it, or it's going to take a little bit to get the required information, let the school know that. And also, lastly, and we cannot stress this enough, verification is routine, not a punishment. Just because a student was selected for verification does not mean they've done anything wrong. It could just be, the algorithm flagged them. Period. End of discussion. It will do that. It will do that. So don't fret. Don't think you've done anything wrong. And most importantly, don't think that you're no longer eligible and that you should just stop. Keep going. Work with the financial aid offices. They are there to help, and they will help you through that process. So we're going to pivot just a little bit, slightly, to professional judgment and provisional independent status. And these do go, I would say, hand in hand, but it's kind of like a sibling to verification. So we're going to talk about professional judgment and what does it mean. This refers to the authority of the school financial aid administrator to adjust data elements on the FAFSA, which can impact the student's cost of attendance, or COA, and or the student aid index number, or SAI. These are made on a case-by-case basis, okay? So got to stress that as well. It's done by the financial aid administrator. It is not done by the U.S. Department of Education, although it is done through the authority of the U.S. Department of Education. Professional judgments made by a school's financial aid office are final, and they cannot be appealed to the U.S. Department of Education. So also keep that in mind. The Department of Ed provides all sorts of guidance and guidelines when it comes to professional judgment. So if the student and the family, they submit a professional judgment and they don't like the results, or I like to say, the results didn't meet their expectations, there is no appeal process. The financial aid office is following the guidance of the U.S. Department of Education. And lastly, every school is required to have a professional judgment process. So in the past, I would say within the past 3 to 5 years, a school could say, no, we don't do that. They can no longer do that. They have to have a process. And one last thing I'll add that isn't on the slide is that if a student, prospective student, is looking at multiple schools and they are selected for verification at multiple schools, which is possible if they're selected by the central processor, so the Department of Ed, they have to complete it at every school. Professional judgments and verification, it doesn't travel. It doesn't travel from school to school. They have to complete it at each school. All right, so we've got two different subsets here. We have unusual and special circumstances. And these are two different types of professional judgment categories. Unusual circumstances, so actually I'm going to pause back up a little bit. In the past, everything got thrown into the professional judgment. Lingo, we would call it a PJ. It'd get thrown in the PJ bucket and we'd sort it out on the back end. Now there are two very distinct subcategories when it comes to professional judgments: unusual circumstances and special circumstances. Unusual circumstances, that's a situation where a student is unable to contact a parent, or when contact with that parent would pose a risk to the student, which would then lead to a financial aid administrator changing a student's dependency status. So this used to be called a dependency override. They've changed the language to reflect so that it reflects unusual circumstances. Special circumstances, a little bit different. This is when a student or a contributor is experiencing a financial situation that leads to a financial aid administrator adjusting data elements in the cost of attendance, COA, or the student aid index number, or SAI. And I probably should have said this earlier, for the grizzled veterans out there, SAI, student aid index number, that is also a Prince reference. This is the artist formerly known as EFC, or expected family contribution. They changed that naming convention probably about 2 or 3 years ago. So just know, if you're new to it and you don't recognize that, that is the quote unquote new EFC. All right. So again, what are the differences? And I touched on this a little bit. Let's dive a little bit deeper. So unusual circumstances. This is when a student's unable to provide the parent information. And we've listed out some examples. So if it's parental abandonment or estrangement, if the student or parent is incarcerated, if there's the death of a parent, if the student has been legally granted refugee or asylum status, or if the student is a victim of human trafficking. Those would all be considered unusual circumstances. Special circumstances, again, this is where it's a change in financial situation. So think loss or reduction in working income, unreimbursed medical or dental or funeral expenses. And I always pause with this. Gang, when we say that, we're talking big numbers. Like, we're not talking, I had a root canal, it cost me $500. No, I mean, we're talking thousands, sometimes tens of thousands. I've done these types of adjustments. It is not a dollar to dollar situation. There's a formula that the Department of Ed requires that schools adhere to. It's not a one for one. So again, I'm not poo-pooing if somebody, broke their arm and their deductible was $2,000. Definitely not poo-pooing that. But we're talking generally thousands and potentially even 5 figures. So keep that in mind. If the parent is divorced or an independent student, if there's a death of a parent or the independent student's spouse. So let me back up. So we're talking independent and dependent in both of those bullets. So if the student's parent, one of the parents or if both of their parents get divorced and now it's a split household, that happens. And and it isn't reflected on the taxes, that's a special circumstance. Or if it's an independent student, they're married and they get divorced, that's a special circumstance. Similar, if it's a dependent student and one of the parents in a two-parent household passes away, that's a special circumstance. If it's an independent student and their spouse passes away, that's a special circumstance. And then lastly, extraordinary care expenses. Used to, folks would kind of just gloss over this and say, well, it would be things like a special needs child in the family. But this could also be care for anyone that you are taking, the family is taking on financial responsibility for. So think any other family members, grandparent, aunt, uncle, things like that. It can be pretty broad when we talk about that. And I'll also say that although we've given examples here, this list is not exhaustive. This isn't everything. So these are situations that on their own don't qualify as unusual circumstances. So if a parent refuses to contribute to the student's education expenses, that's not valid. Parents are not willing to provide information for the FAFSA, also not valid, but there is an avenue in which the student can be still eligible for some aid that we're going to talk about next. Parents don't claim the student as a dependent for income tax purposes. That hasn't been the case for, oh my goodness, 30, 40 years. So probably closer to 40 years. And then similarly, student demonstrates total self-sufficiency. Unfortunately, not a valid reason. I've lived through all of these, gang. They're not fun conversations. These are the federal regulations. These are not what would not qualify. So now we do have a situation, and I just mentioned it, about parent refusal. So I think everyone has probably gone through this, where the parent is just, for some reason, one reason or another, vehement. They are not providing their information on the FAFSA. So if the parents of a dependent student aren't willing to do so, but the student doesn't have one of those unusual circumstances, the student can choose to have their school determine their eligibility for a direct, unsubsidized loan only. This will still have to be confirmed by the college through a written statement by the parents, or documentation for a third party. And most schools will try to make this as simple as possible for the student. So if it's the case where the parent will not provide information, you can see the screenshot there from the FAFSA. They make sure that they say that the parents are refusing to provide their information on the FAFSA form. Yes, and then they continue. All right, so we're kind of right on the edge there of talking about dependency status. So why don't we just teeter on over and talk about dependent versus independent students and what that actually means. So it's determined, determines whose information is reported on the FAFSA. So first and foremost, dependent students are required to report both student and parental information. Independent students are required to report only their information, and if they're married, their information and their spouse's information. So some students will continue to qualify as independent on the FAFSA form and not be required to provide parental information and we've got the list there. So if they're an orphan at the age of 13 or older, they were a ward of the court, are or were in foster care, were an emancipated minor, or in a legal guardianship as determined by a court in the student's state of residence. I'm going to pause there momentarily. I do not believe Ohio has an emancipated minor law. So I know when I was in the aid office, that was an immediate red flag. If I saw an Ohio student who said they were an emancipated minor, guess what? I was selecting them for verification because there was no such thing in Ohio. Now, legal guardianship, whole different situation. That is definitely valid in Ohio. Last one are an unaccompanied homeless youth or unaccompanied at risk of homelessness and self-supporting. So again, these are things that would qualify the student as an independent student, meaning they would not need parental information. Okay, so if the student does not meet any of the criteria of an independent student, they will be determined as dependent unless they indicate on the FAFSA that they have one of those unusual circumstances that we talked about just a little bit ago. And the line on the FAFSA, do unusual circumstances prevent the student from contacting their parents, or would contacting their parents pose a risk to the student? The student can click yes on the FAFSA and continue on the FAFSA. Now, this would then trigger what we call provisional independent status. If they select yes, essentially what they're saying is, I, as the student, have an unusual circumstance. They are then given provisional independent student status and are not required to include parent information on the FAFSA at that point in time. That said, a financial aid administrator at the school or schools will follow up with the student to determine if a dependency override is valid. Until the student's circumstances are verified, the student will only have an estimate of their financial aid eligibility. So in some ways, this is very similar to verification, where the school will give them estimated aid, but they have to resolve this. They have to go through the process to make sure that, yes, I am indeed independent based on those unusual circumstances. So what happens next? We've covered a lot of ground with verification and now special and unusual circumstances. So the college is going to request that documentation. We've talked a little bit about that. So oftentimes it's a signed student statement describing the situation and any supporting documentation. So letters from third parties, could be school counselor, caseworker, clergy. And this is specific to unusual circumstances. Colleges should provide an estimated timeline for their request to be reviewed, so it can't just sit out there indefinitely. Colleges have to let them know, acknowledge receipt, and then also, we will have an answer to you within X timeline. And then at that point, the financial aid office does review and evaluate the situation, the nature of the circumstances, what documentation was provided, and schools can approve or deny the request for an override. And again, it's not appealable by the Department of Education. Some schools will also, if they feel there's something there, but they don't quite have what they need, they may also request additional documentation. So this is why when we say students need to keep their eyes and their ears open, this is another good situation, another good case where keep your eyes and ears open. And if the school asks you for something, please follow up with them. On the screen, we have a couple of sample texts from schools outlining their process, specifically for unsubsidized loans only, or if the student is claiming unusual or other circumstances. So I'm not going to read through these. That's not the point of this slide. But realistically, we just wanted to provide some sample text as to what the school is going to be communicating to the student about these situations. All right, so we've covered unusual circumstances. We're gonna dive into special circumstances now. So this is the financial stuff. So what qualifies as a special circumstance? So a loss or reduction in working income, the loss of benefits such as child support, unemployment, alimony, Social Security disability, or workers' compensation. A one-time lump sum or pension 401k withdrawal, unreimbursed family medical, dental expenses, or funeral expenses, extraordinary care expenses such as elder care and adult children not already included in the number in the household, a divorce, or a death. So what does not qualify as a special circumstance? So inability to pay the estimated or outstanding balance at the school, that's not considered. The number of students in college in the household. So, gang, I'm going to highlight this one for two reasons. One, this was uh, with the FAFSA Simplification Act, this was removed as a criteria. However, it can be confusing and misleading because the FAFSA still asks for this information. And that's because some schools may use it for their own institutional aid, but it does not have any bearing on federal aid. Standard of living expenses, so things like utilities, credit card debt, mortgage, et cetera, or any type of consumer debt, not included, not considered. Educational debt, not considered. Expenses the family has been paying regularly for several years, such as health insurance premiums and costs. Lifestyle expenses, so vacation or tithing or family events like weddings or retirement, or one-time increases in the family's income, like lottery winnings or inheritances. These are all things that would not qualify as a special circumstance. So some other things of note. So I've alluded to this, but we're going to address them specifically. Each college has its own process, procedure, and paperwork to complete. Their timelines can also be different. So this is, again, keep your eyes and ears open. Even after post submittal, if it's to multiple schools, they may have different timelines. You can only apply for one tax year. So obviously the FAFSA is looking at one single tax year. They're only going to look at one tax year. Documentation will likely be required as part of this process. I don't know of any school that would do any type of financial adjustment without documentation. Additional questions about what can be considered a special circumstance should be directed to the individual colleges. And then lastly, typically appeals are done after the student receives their financial aid offer. So I know I've gotten those questions. People know it's coming, like the student and family know it's coming with, maybe a loss of a job or a death in the family or divorce, something like that. They know it's coming. However, it's best to submit the FAFSA, have the school respond with an award offer, financial aid offer, and then do the appeal, then do the special circumstance. And we've also, again, just for example, we do have a couple of sample appeal forms here to give you a taste, a flavor as to what it looks like. And so we've got a couple here from the University of Dayton and Ohio State to just kind of give you the look and feel of what a student would be looking at potentially. So at that, I'm going to pause here. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Melanie here. And Melanie. Did we lose? There she is, I think. You're on mute, Mel.
All right.
Would you like me to drive?
No, I'm going to go ahead and we'll see how that will work.
Okay. All right. Bear with us, folks. We're just transitioning the presenter here. You gotta love that technology lag.
Yep. Okay, and I think I need to switch.
Yep. Just go ahead and switch your display settings.
Which of course now I cannot see them because they're on the wrong screen.
I can just drive, Mel. It's fine. All
It
right.
was all set up until now, so.
Dang, it really was. I promise we did practice this, but that's okay. We're gonna keep going. We'll make some lemonade here. So I'm gonna go off camera. I'll go on mute. And Melanie, the show is yours.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got a lot of information that we're going to be going through. Please, just a reminder that we have the FAQ for you to go ahead, questions and answer, to ask any questions that you might have. So please don't hesitate to jump right in and ask those questions. We're going to take a look at financial aid offers first. Before we actually jump into the financial aid offer, and I did want to mention, Ed, if you could just, well, we could leave it here and apologize. I'm just a little befungled at not having things work the way they were supposed to. But I did want to mention as a reminder that annually OASFA does a priority deadline survey where we go out to all the colleges in Ohio, universities, and basically ask them and survey them with regards to, when are your FAFSA priority deadlines and your estimated aid offer start dates. While some of them have passed, a couple of them just being as recent as February the 15th. Keep in mind that there's still a lot of them that are coming up, and some schools have rolling deadlines. So this is a really great resource that you're going to want to be sure that you're sharing with your students. It's out there in the OASFA resource section, and Ed is going to be looking at that a little bit later in the session that we're walking through today. So wanted to mention that to you and make sure you guys take a look at that. Okay, looking at financial aid offers, an aid offer basically covers one academic year at a time. It's a document that outlines the amounts and details of financial aid being offered to the student. Just want to be sure we're on the same. There we go. It will be provided by each post-secondary institution listed on the FAFSA that the student has been accepted to. With the FAFSA being back on schedule last fall and it actually opening before the October 1st required date, we'll want to get the word out to the students, especially at this point in time in their senior year, that they don't want to wait until after they've been accepted for admissions before completing the FAFSA and listing all of the schools that they're interested in. So it's really the idea that the earlier the better if they haven't already done it. And hopefully a lot of them already have completed the FAFSA, applied for admissions, but we know we have some students who maybe progress a little bit more slowly through that process. So again, the earlier the better, get the FAFSA done, get their admissions applications in, list every school they're interested on the FAFSA, because that's real important to keep in mind. And then that way they can get those aid offers as soon as possible. The goal or the purpose of the aid offers, basically the bottom line is to enable the student or the family to be able to determine how much a student will pay for college, which of course we all know that's a critical step, and they're taking the leap to attend. They have to be able to determine how much out of pocket is going to cost them. So again, keeping in mind that an aid offer is going to contain the official cost of attendance and the financial aid that the students can expect to receive. And we'll be taking a closer look at both of these. Unfortunately, sometimes those aid offers are a little bit difficult to decipher. One of the reasons is simply in how they're delivered. Delivery methods vary among colleges and universities. There's a paper version, there's an email version, there's online portals. So really your students should just be watching closely and frequently, checking their mail, their emails, and be sure they're all set up to receive any of those pieces that come through the school's portal. Okay. Okay, some of the challenges in comparing aid offers. We wanted to share a few more of these. Students just need to be aware of these challenges that they may face. That way they're not surprised as they're receiving their aid offers and they're trying to compare them. We don't want them to think that I'm the only one who doesn't get this. I'm the only one having a challenge with this. These challenges exist and they're recognized. First, there's no standard format or template. Not all schools list all the different types of costs or total costs. So that can cause some confusion. One school has some costs, the other school has, direct costs, the other has direct and indirect. We always want to try to compare apples to apples. Not all will break out the cost components. It might just be a total. So that makes it a little bit more challenging because without knowing the indirect costs, the student doesn't know some of those costs they can try to control or they can try to minimize. So, making sure that they know the costs, that they can be able to see to break those out. And then, of course, as Ed already mentioned, financial aid is a language all its own. We've got that jargon, that terminology used, and it can be confusing if it's not fully explained. And then not all schools will separate or categorize aid by type. And we talk about aid by type, we can go on to the next slide that basically talks about the idea of grant, work, and loan. Okay, let's start with the concept. Let's see. Okay, I think we're on the slide. I'm having trouble seeing what Ed's actually got up there, but hopefully we're on the slide where we're talking about the difference between gift aid and self-help. So in addition to the costs, the aid offer will, of course, in some form be included on the aid offer, telling the student what they're eligible for. So what does that aid look like, or what types of aid can be included? This slide shows the two types of financial aid, gift aid and self-help. Again, one thing which can make understanding aid offers a little bit confusing is the fact that schools can present this information differently. Again, for example, not all schools will separate or categorize them by aid type. It might not have gift aid and then show scholarships or grants. It might not then say self-help and talk about loans and college work study or work study. So again, it's really important for the student to understand what is the free money and what is the self-help. So if they're not clear on that, they want to be sure that they're talking to the financial aid office. Okay, they want if they can't tell from the aid offer which is the gift money, the free money that we like best versus which part is the self-help, again, which includes loans and the work, they want to be sure that they're reaching out to financial aid to get that information. And we'll be taking a closer look at all of these a little later. But again, here, this slide really just gives you just names a list for you of the different types of aid that are out there. Okay, when we take a look at this slide, here basically what hopefully caught your attention was the idea of the big stop sign. We just want to say it again, making sure you know how much you're getting in gift aid, the free money, that the students need to understand that before they start committing to any types of loans. So we made it big and red because it's very important. We want to be sure that that's what they're doing first and they're maximizing that, the free money, the gift assistance that's out there. As we said earlier, part of what can make all of this confusing is that while some schools will categorize the aid or group it together, others won't. They just list all of the aid in one big list. And again, the students need to know to apply for all possible sources of free money while they are in high school, and also be sure that they understand once they get to college, they don't stop looking for the free money for the scholarships. So many times a student puts all this effort in, they're looking for scholarships, they accomplish the goal, they get into school, and they quit looking. They quit doing the searches, they quit paying attention. We all know that students can change their mind. Their majors can change, so scholarships they might be eligible for can change, and new scholarships come out all the time. So again, we want to be sure that even when they get off to college, they work just as diligently to try to find scholarship opportunities that are out there. So what are the steps? Determine direct and indirect costs. This allows you to isolate the cost of attendance. Next, identify that gift aid. Then you're subtracting the gift aid from the cost to identify the net cost. That's one of those terminologies, one of those pieces of information we want to be sure that we're familiar with. Again, that idea of cost of attendance, making sure it's direct and indirect, identifying that gift aid, subtracting that from the cost, and that's where we end up with our net cost. And then basically you're comparing the net cost of each of the schools. And as we said before, we want to be sure that they're comparing apples to apples. If one aid offer shows direct and indirect costs, but the other one doesn't, then they want to contact that other school, go out to the school's website. If they can't find estimates for indirect costs, then they can reach out to financial aid because they really have to be sure to compare apples to apples so that they can understand that true net price or that out-of-pocket cost, and they're not just looking at a sticker price. All right. A little bit more on steps in comparing offers. What do we do next? The next part of it basically is subtracting the federal direct student loans and the work that the student might be receiving. So what all does that involve? For the federal direct student loans, want to include and compare both possible types, subsidized and unsubsidized, so that they know what is included in the aid offer. And we'll be discussing the types a little bit later, the differences between the two very quickly. But they want to be sure that they know whether or not they've got eligibility for sub, eligibility for unsub, or some combination of the two. And then if work or work study is offered, they want to be sure that they understand exactly what that is. Keep in mind that some schools will subtract the work amount as well from that net cost on the aid offers, while others do not. We encourage students to either not subtract it or add it back in if the school had subtracted it, because keeping in mind that when we talk about work and college work study, that even if the school subtracts it, it's not going to be money that they're going to receive up front to go toward their bill. Okay, the work funds are not subtracted from the student's bill up front, but instead they're exactly what they sound like. It's funds paid directly to the student, and that the student actually earns that money from working. Now, some universities may have it set up that as the student works, that can go toward any balance that they might have. But again, it's until they've worked, that's not money that will be subtracted up front. And we also tell folks while that direct sub and unsub gets subtracted, you definitely do not subtract Federal Parent Plus and private loans because with these two options, we're excluding them because it's an additional application, there's a credit check, and so it's not more of an automatic process like the student's direct sub and unsub are. So again, when we're comparing those 8 offers, subtract the student's direct and unsub, sub and unsub, add back in the work, and if somebody has subtracted plus and or a private loan, you want to add that back in too, because that's part of the puzzle that the family is going to figure out together. But you don't want to have that subtracted because if that's subtracted, it could say needed 0. And that's not the case because those other loan programs that require a credit check were built into that. Okay. All right. Some questions for the financial aid office here. We put together questions to help students collect information that's important for them to understand with regards to 8 offers. First of all, when they're comparing the 8 offers for different schools, they want to know these things. But also, even if they're definitely sure what school they're going to attend, they still need to find these things out because the student wants to know, what do I need to do? And they want to be sure they understand what they need to do in order to keep their aid. They want to understand whether or not each type of aid that's listed, is it 1 year only? Is it renewable? So those are all the types of questions they want to be sure that they understand either from the aid offer or from talking to the schools. But this is information that's needed so they can understand what to expect as well as what is expected of them. So basically, which aid is renewable and what is involved in retaining eligibility, or is this a 1 year award? Is your tuition frozen? Is it guaranteed? Will tuition increase each year? Do you know what percentage it increases each year? Will financial aid change if your enrollment status changes, part-time versus full-time? And if so, by how much? What will that look like? Will financial aid change if you change housing and meal plans? And again, by how much? What will those things look like? So again, those are very important questions, whether a student's comparing 8 offers or whether they know what school they're going to and they just want to understand the aid from that school they know that they will be attending. Okay, and then we have a couple of more to help students understand the aid offers. Is aid impacted, or more specifically, will it be reduced if the student receives an external scholarship? I know that that's something that you guys have heard. You've gotten that question before. You've probably asked a few colleges or universities that question on behalf of your students. What's going to happen when they bring in additional external scholarships? It can be different from school to school. It could be different based on the type of scholarships. So again, we need to be talking with the financial aid office at each of the colleges. Earlier, we talked about how work study is not money subtracted from the bill up front, but the student will be paid when they actually work. There are some questions that they should ask so that they understand, well, what's that work opportunity look like? What do I have to do to be sure that I have a job? Basically, they need to understand the steps or the process involved in getting the job. Will they be left on their own to find it? How much help will the college provide in finding it? How many available jobs are out there? Is the job guaranteed? So all of those questions are important because if they're planning on using that work award or the work study award to help them with their expenses throughout the term and while they're enrolled, they need to understand if they really are going to be able to get that job. And then also, are there any guarantees on the number of hours? And of course, what's the pay rate? That's something they want to be sure to ask. And basically, with all of those questions, the student is finding out if it is realistic that they'll be able to earn the amount of work that's included in their 8 offer. If it's $1,000, chances are, yes, they may be able to do that. If it's a higher amount, will they be able to work enough hours? Are they getting a high enough pay rate to actually earn what is being shown in the aid offer? So there's some more kind of deep questions. Since this is Financial Aid 201, we're kind of delving in the weeds a little bit more and getting into some of those nitty-gritty questions that they need to be asking. Okay, we've got a couple of aid offers that we're going to take a look at. The first one, well, actually, both of them, we've divided them into two different sections, two different screens, just so you can see it a little bit easier, rather than it being really small. So here basically is a sample of an aid offer. And again, we divided up into cut it up into two pieces on two different slides. First, it identifies the year that the aid offer is for, making it clear that it's for one academic year only. And this is a couple of years old, but it's still a good example. You see there in the very first paragraph, our college is pleased to provide you with following financial assistance for 24-25 academic year. So it's very clear, 1 year only. I got to do this again. The opening paragraph there at the end of the opening paragraph also makes it clear that this is for full-time enrollment for fall and spring semesters, but doesn't include summer. So the student knows that if I'm maybe not going to be full-time one of those, then this might not apply to me. And it also tells them this isn't going to help me with summer if I'm planning on attending for the summer. Next is a list of the sources of aid. And while this example doesn't really, divide the sources out when it comes to that gift aid, separating it from the self-help, the loans, and the work study that might be there, it makes it pretty clear. Each one says federal Pell Grant, supplemental grant, higher college option grant, then scholarship, grant, scholar, and then it says loan. So even though they're not separated, they've made it very clear. And also, just as an FYI, this school actually has a guide that they include with this aid offer that gets into a lot of additional information as well. And a lot of schools will do that. So there's a supplemental piece that gets into the detail. I'm looking at the bottom half or the second part of our sample offer, number one. This is where we get into the cost of attendance and breaking that down. Stating here it includes both direct charges and estimated indirect charges. So it's very good that it's showing both of those. In the two boxes off to the right, there's more detail to understand both cost numbers that are provided. It helps the student estimate out-of-pocket costs. And it even does two different calculations. One, if the direct student loans were accepted, and you can see there that basically what their balance would be, remaining balance will be if they've accepted it, the 4,118. But it also says if you don't accept and you've declined the student loans, then this is what the balance is. So it does a really nice picture of giving them an idea of what they're actually facing. Also, in most cases, the student, of course, could accept the amount in the subsidized direct loan, or in all cases, they can accept the subsidized and decline the unsubsidized if they choose to. And we're going to talk about, again, the differences between those two for some of you that may be newer and don't understand quite what the differences are. And then the message from the financial aid office at the bottom talks about work. And additional funding options. And again, there's a guide that gives them more information about financing options as well as their payment plan. So this one did a pretty good job of getting the information out there. Here's sample offer notification number 2. Again, we've divided that up. This one does a pretty good job as well. Quickly just walking through the slide, tuition cost is clear. Scholarships and grants, they're identified as gift aid. On the right side, where the star is, might be kind of hard to read, but it advises that it's renewable and it tells them the conditions that they need to keep it. It does a net tuition calculation for them that tuition minus the gift aid. Then it goes on and adds housing and meals to provide the total billable cost. Then at the bottom, it talks about options there to meet their education costs that are remaining. For the loans, it advises they can subtract it from the billable minus the federal loan origination fees. Again, that's something we'll take a quick look at, but with the federal loans, most of them have origination fees. Those are dollars that come off the top of the total loan amount borrowed that doesn't come to the school. Student doesn't get it, but the student's always responsible for repaying it. So this does a nice job of mentioning those origination fees, because if I borrow $5,500 as a first year student and I'm borrowing only what I need, and I say I only needed $4,000 when I've been awarded $5,500, I'm not going to get 4,000. So it's important and it's great in this example that they show that. Looking at the second half of our sample offer notification number two. This one basically just goes a step further to give a complete look at the total 4-year investment. Tuition, it references a tuition guarantee, talks about the school's residency policy, how long they have to live on campus, when can they move off of campus, talks about non-billable, which in some cases schools will call it indirect costs, so a little difference in terminology sometimes. But again, this one provides some great information. It has information about average loan debt and graduation rates and things like travel abroad. So again, you're going to see really very different types of aid offers that are out there. And this is a great job with both of these examples, but it does make it a little bit harder to compare it to other aid offers because it has so much more information than some might have. They have to sit down and be able to compare apples to apples. Which pieces am I pulling from these that compares to information on another aid offer that maybe doesn't have quite as much? So again, even great examples can make it a little bit challenging to actually be comparing them. Okay. All right, this slide lists some important considerations for the student and family. We kind of talked about a few of them. Things like, does the institution have a tuition guarantee? Do most students complete the degree in 2 or 4 years as designed? Some additional questions which help the student drill down on how much time it might take them to graduate. A couple more that aren't on the slide. It talks about, will the student need to enroll over the summer to graduate on time? Are there sequential courses that could put the student behind if they don't test into the right level, or maybe if they have to withdraw from a class? So really just kind of understanding, how long will I be here? How easy is it for me to get through in 4 years? What's required to get through in 4 years is important to understand, because of course, if they're there longer than 4 years, then their total cost out of pocket is going to be greater. Okay, so that's real important. The last 2 bullets, again, just some good advice. Living off campus can be less expensive than living, but not always. Again, it really depends on the student's lifestyle and the individual choices they make. That's where we talk about the idea that those indirect costs that are listed on an aid offer are where a family has a little bit of control. Having a roommate, cooking meals, taking the bus, and then also keeping in mind those restrictions where it may require the student to live on campus for a year or two. Okay, a few more things to basically help and take a look at ways to make college more affordable. We always tell folks to explore the 2+2 pathways as a great way to reduce costs. You guys probably have students that you work with that took college credit while they were in high school. They had the dual enrollment. So, I know students who come into college with an associate's degree already. So anything like that is a great thing. And even if they didn't do that when they were in high school, they can still look at those 2+2 pathways, which is a way to help them reduce their total out-of-pocket costs. Encourage students to work part-time during the academic year, full-time, things like resident advisor positions that are open. And again, applying for external scholarships, inquiring with the college about major specific scholarships. And again, do not stop looking for scholarships once they get to college, which so many of them do. They want to be sure that they're keeping up their profiles. If their profiles change, be sure that they're going out to those sources that they used when they were in high school to look for scholarships while they're still in college. Okay. And then one other thing to keep in mind, and it may not really be applicable to this audience, but you may be talking with students who'd already graduated, is that if they are working, to check with their employer, because there's often tuition reimbursement. And, sometimes we have more students right out of high school who are working, going part-time, and perhaps their employer does have some type of tuition reimbursement for them. So that's gaining popularity. So we want to be sure that we're asking about those. Okay, on this next slide, we have a QR code for you to scan. It basically is a cost comparison sheet to help that OASFA has created to help students do that comparison. A lot of different places out there have those. Colleges may have them, a lot of different resources, but there's one for you that we wanted to go ahead and share. Okay, the next section we're going to jump into, and I don't know, Ed, if we had any questions, or if there's any comments about the aid offers that you wanted to go ahead and add before we jumped into key terms and loan information.
We didn't have anything, Mel, about that, but
Okay.
we did have a question about special circumstances, and we can just wait until the end on that one, and I'll cover that.
Okay, great. Alrighty. Now we're going to jump into key terms and loan information. Um, I do want to mention before we talk about the idea of always looking for free money, is that I do want to acknowledge that there's been a lot of press out there about the budget reconciliation bill that became a law with the president's signature back on July 4th. It included changes to the federal loan programs, many of which take effect July 1st of 2026. And considering they will take effect July 1st of 2026, that means that they may impact your seniors. We don't have all of the details yet, so making sure that they understand that they're talking with financial aid, making sure that they understand if there's any changes. We don't have all those details, but there are a few things that we have confidence in, that we think we can, comfortably be sharing with you. But we'll be including some of these changes when appropriate as we go through the next, I don't know, 10 or 15 slides that we have that talk about the loan programs. We're really doing a deeper dive into the loan programs for a couple of reasons, partly because of all the changes that have been out there in the press, but also because we've gotten requests to do that. Even at the counselor workshops, we get, requests from counselors to say, hey, can you go deeper in this area? So because it has been talked about, because there are so many changes, we are really doing a pretty detailed deep dive into the information with regards to the changes. This PowerPoint, of course, will be posted to the resource page that Ed's going to show you here before we finish up. And then also, so you'll be able to download that, and the recording will be there as well. Okay. I want to mention that when we talk about federal loans, that keep in mind that it is a type of federal financial aid. A lot of folks will think of their financial aid and then they think of a loan. A loan is, when we talk about the federal loans, they are part of financial aid. They're probably the most commonly used type of financial aid. So you want to be sure your families are keeping that in mind, that they're not thinking of it as something separate from financial aid, that loans are probably one of the most commonly, again, used types of financial aid that are out there. Again, the slide here with the key terms and loans, again, important enough that we're going to mention it. Always maximize that gift aid, the scholarships and the grants before they start pursuing and committing to student loans. It's a no-brainer. We all agree that free money is the best as opposed to money that has to be repaid. Here are just some terms when it comes to loans, borrowing in general, that we put out there just to help students understand. They can do a lot of research, look them up. So I'm not going to read the definitions for each of them, but of course, the interest rate, and we'll talk about rates on the various loans, interest capitalization, the idea of accruing interest and what happens to accrued unpaid interest, that it becomes capitalized and possibly added to the outstanding balance. And then repayment incentives are the good things. These are ways to get interest rate reductions or credit to loan balances. So again, those are three very important terms that the student has to be sure that they understand with relation to federal and or private loans. All right, we're going to start with some of the basic terms and conditions for the direct student loans. And again, these are the ones that are on the aid offer that after scholarships and grants and you get to a net price, folks will subtract these federal direct student loans. That doesn't mean the student can't decline both, sub and unsub if they're awarded, or accept sub or decline unsub. But keep in mind, these will appear on the aid offer and will be subtracted to get down to what's it really going to cost a student out of pocket. And again, that's different from Parent Plus loans and private loans, which require additional steps as far as credit checks. These direct student loans, sub and unsub, do not require credit checks. Direct subsidized, unsubsidized loans are low interest loans for students that are enrolled in college at least half time. And that's going to be important. We're going to talk about a change with regards to half-time enrollment in just a couple of slides. With the direct subsidized, it's available only to eligible undergraduate students who technically demonstrate financial need. So graduate students are not eligible, and undergraduate students who don't technically demonstrate financial need are not eligible either. And since they demonstrate need based on federal guidelines or the formula, the students who are borrowing these direct subsidized loans, they are not responsible for the interest that is charged during some key points in time, while they're in school at least half time, during the 6-month grace period. You see that on the slide, and also during any eligible deferments period. So the interest is basically covered by the federal government. With the unsubsidized direct loan, the interest rates as well as the fees charged are the same as subsidized, but the one big difference is when the unsub was created, it was created so that students who technically don't demonstrate financial need based on the calculation, that federal formula and guideline, that they, even though they don't technically demonstrate need, well, they need money to help them pay their out-of-pocket costs, and they need to borrow. So the unsubsidized loan was created years and years ago, I guess decades ago, actually. But since the unsub is borrowed when technically no need is demonstrated, the major difference that impacts the student and could increase their total cost of borrowing is that during those 3 key periods of time, while they're in school at least half time, during the 6-month grace period after they've graduated, and during any valid deferment period, the student is responsible for that interest. So basically, when a subsidized loan is interest-free for a student, an unsubsidized loan, they are always responsible for the interest at all times. They're not required to pay it, but technically they're responsible for it. And that's where the idea of unpaid interest accruing and capitalization comes into play. So even if they're not required to pay interest on a direct unsub, that might be something they want to consider doing, or perhaps mom and dad can consider doing for them during that in-school grace or deferment periods. Okay. This basically shows us the federal direct sub and unsubsidized loans, the program details, and again, for undergraduate students. There are no changes to these basic terms and conditions that are provided on this slide by that legislation, the OB3, as folks lovingly refer to it. But keep in mind that, first of all federal loans have origination fees, which again, we mentioned are subtracted from the funds being sent to the school. With the direct student loans, the sub and unsub that the student borrow, it's a relatively small fee. It's 1.057%. So basically, if they borrow the max of the $5,500, which you see on the right is the annual limit for a dependent first-year student, if they ask for the full $5,500 and they're eligible for it, the fee that comes off the top is $58.14. That's 1.057% of $5,500. So keep in mind, if they needed $5,500, they're not going to be receiving $5,500, that there's still going to be an outstanding balance of the $58.14 in the fees that came off the top. Borrowers of federal loan programs are still responsible for repaying all fees that are subtracted, even though they're not technically using them toward their balances. Okay, next, let's talk about the interest rate charge. This shows the current interest rate of 6.39% for loans dispersed between July 1st of 2025 through June 30th of 26. So basically for this academic year. Keep in mind that these loans have fixed rates, fixed interest rates. So annually, every loan that's dispersed in the 25-26 academic year has the same fixed interest rate for the life of the loan. Okay, so again, this year's the interest rate is 6.39%. That's actually down a little bit from last year's. During the 24-25 academic year, the interest rates for all of the direct sub and unsub student loans was 6.53%. So each year, all the loans dispersed have the same fixed rate, but those change annually. And they can go up and down based on Treasury bill rates and an add-on that the federal government sets. So keep in mind, they're fixed interest rates, but each year they adjust, and that becomes effective July 1st of each academic year. And again, last year, the 6.53 was probably the highest rate we had seen in a decade. So we did see it come down a little bit. For the current year, that's 6.39. And we're just going to have to wait to see what happens when they adjust for the 26-27 year, becoming effective on July 1st. if I could tell you exactly what was going to happen to it, I probably wouldn't be here talking with you. I'd be rich somewhere else if I could predict what interest rates we're going to do. But again, and we have a link for you on the slide where it shows you the Treasury bill rate history. You can pop out there or take a look at it if you're curious to see what it looks like. Okay, and then again on the right-hand side, that box really just shows you the annual borrowing limits. Again, a first-year student can borrow a total of 5,500. But within that 5,500, the government also has a limit annually as to how much they can borrow in a subsidized, again, these are undergraduate students only, how much they can borrow in a subsidized and then additional money in an unsub. So it's a total of 5,500, but it's a max of 3,500 sub and an additional 2,000 unsub. So what that basically means is a school could cost $1 million a year. A kid could have no financial aid. Parents could not be contributing at all, and the most subsidized money they could borrow that first year would be 3,500 because that's the limit. Then they could borrow an additional 2,000 through an unsub. And we already talked about the primary difference having to do with the interest and whether or not who's responsible for that during those key points in time that we talked about. Okay. And then you'll see that second year it goes up to 6,500 total, 4,500 and 2,000. Third year and third and final years that are out there, it's 7,500, 5,500 sub, 2,000 unsubsidized. Then it also shows you the 31,000, which is the aggregate maximum for a dependent undergraduate student. And then it also tells us at the bottom that the limits are higher for independent students. Okay, so that shows you everything that's happening there. This slide, this is all due to the fact that things changed when the legislation was signed on July 1st of this current year, back in July. This slide shows some of the changes to the federal loan programs that result from that budget reconciliation, the OB3. The first column, you can see that as we just discussed on the last slide, there are no changes to undergraduate borrowing limits. Okay, so you can see there, and we kind of put the red box around it. Undergraduate, sub and unsub, no change. Annually, it's still 5,500 up to 12,500, and the aggregate is 31,000 up to 57,500. The little yellow squares, those are your dependent students. The 5,500 is the lowest that they can borrow the first year. And then we already saw in the previous slide that their aggregate, the most they can borrow the whole time they're in school as an undergrad is the 31,000. The higher amounts that you see, that's where that additional money that independent students can borrow comes into play as an undergraduate student. But for your high school students, that annual for the first year and then the aggregate for all years, we have those circled in yellow for you. Okay, so those are no different. Where there is a big change, a major changes deal with the PLUS loan changes that are coming. But as with so many other things, of course, the government has made, or the legislation has made PLUS loan changes, but there are exceptions. Now we're going to try to keep this as simple as possible. Before we go over the new stuff, I just want to mention that we had put an appendix in place that's following all the slides we're going to look at today and review. We're not even going to look at them. Just know that they're there. They're after the question slide. I don't want you to come to the question slide and not look any further, not go any further and look at those. So they're in an appendix, and they get into much more detail, and they talk about the exceptions. We're not going to, and slide number 71, if you want to jot it down, is the one that talks about the exceptions regarding some of the PLUS loan changes. Okay, so more detail there, but basically, these exceptions, the government calls them legacy provisions. And as the term legacy suggests, they apply only to existing or current borrowers. So in most cases, the bottom line, your high school students won't ever be eligible for any of the exceptions. So your high school students, when it comes to any exceptions, you hear about legacy provisions, the students are not impacted, they're not eligible, okay? But we talk about the parents and the changes to the PLUS loan program. Keep in mind, it's worth mentioning today that while most of your parents may not be impacted, that there will be some who are impacted by the changes. We all know that some high school students have older siblings, and their parents may have already borrowed Parent Plus loans for those older siblings. So if you're talking with a high school student, they have older siblings, mom and dad have already borrowed, one or the other or both have already borrowed Parent Plus loans for that older sibling, those legacy provisions could apply to them. Bottom line, with parents who have already borrowed from the Parent Plus loan, their situation can be different. I think the most important thing is talking, when you're talking with a student, with parents, if they've already borrowed, the best advice you can give them is send them to the financial aid office. Okay, it's really complicated for us to get in it, for us to get into it today any further, but it's important for them to know because, again, those legacy provisions exist. When you take a look at the last column there on the right, you can see that the annual Parent Plus loan limit, and this is for parents who have not borrowed before July 1st of 2026 coming up, their annual limit is $20,000 a year. Okay. And the aggregate limit that a Parent Plus loan borrower borrowing for the first time after July 1st, the most they can borrow for any one dependent student. And keep in mind that this is 65,000 aggregate limit is per dependent student. So each parent, both parents combined, may borrow $20,000 per year, but over the course of their enrollment for the student, the most they can borrow is 65,000. And that's important for your parents of your senior students to know because they may have heard something about, plus loans, yeah, you can get whatever you need. Parents who have, those older siblings in the past, they borrowed up to the cost of attendance minus any other financial aid. That's that legacy exception that applies only to folks who had started borrowing. So someone who had started borrowing, it's still cost of attendance minus any other financial aid. After July 1st of 2026, a parent who has not borrowed a plus loan, $20,000 is the most that can be borrowed on behalf of a student in an academic year, and $65,000 is the aggregate lifetime limit that can be borrowed by both parents or an individual parent on behalf of a student. That's important because if a school costs $100,000 a year and the student has $80,000 in other financial aid, so the parent's going to borrow a plus loan of $20,000. They borrow $20,000 year one, $20,000 year two, because if you needed it, chances are you'll need it for the future years, not just the first year, because we want to get through college. We don't just want to get to the first year. So if my parent needs to borrow $20,000 the first year, then after 3 years, I've borrowed $60,000. When I come to year four, I only have $5,000 in remaining eligibility. Now that may be enough because the student has additional direct loan eligibility. Maybe they've worked and saved more money, but the important thing to remember is these limits are out there. And also if the gap between the cost of attendance and the other aid, if it's, $40,000, cost of attendance is 100, the student has $60,000 in aid, including their direct loans, that gap that's remaining is 40,000. Prior to July 1st, a parent could ask for 40,000 for 1 year, most likely be approved for 40,000 for 1 year, and they were set. The most they can ask for next year as a parent borrowing for the first time is 20,000. So that's going to leave a remaining gap that needs to be looked at. Okay, so I know that that's a lot of information, but again, I've talked with counselors who have said, well, I've already got parents who are, they didn't know anything about this. They thought they could borrow $40,000 or they thought they could borrow as much as they needed. They can't as a new borrower. Again, legacy. We've got some slides to talk about that at the end in the appendix, but this slide shows you for your seniors whose parents have never borrowed what they're looking at as they begin looking at those aid offers and trying to figure out of pocket, how are we going to come up with the funds that we need? Okay. And the chart also shows you lifetime limits. And again, there's a link here. If you're really interested in seeing more detail, there's a link that'll take you to a chart from NASFA, which is our National Association for Student Financial Aid Administrators, and it gives you a lot of detail there. Okay. I know that was a mouthful. Ed, anything that I may not have said correctly, or anything you want to jump in and add when it comes to kind of what parents are facing with regards to the limits?
Couldn't find my unmute. No, Mel, I think that was it. Very thorough. I think we're good.
Okay, great. I was just getting ready to say, did I drop off? Did I just say
No,
all of that?
I
Nobody
couldn't
was.
find my mute button. Couldn't
No
unmute.
worries. Okay, great. Thank you. Now we're going to go back to some of the basics, that we've talked about in the past, but we want to ensure that we're sharing these with you. This is the easier stuff. We have another slide in just a few minutes. It's going to take a closer look at the loan application process. But of course, a big part of the federal direct student loan application process is understanding that this is federal financial aid, as we said before, and it's actually the most utilized. But as federal financial aid, the FAFSA is required. So again, keep that in mind. They have to complete the FAFSA. Even for that unsubsidized direct student loan, they need to go ahead and go through the FAFSA, have the numbers, the results come through, and then it's determined whether or not they have eligibility for a subsidized versus an unsubsidized loan. And we all recommend that, even if a parent feels that they're not going to be eligible for anything else, they still want to go through that process to be sure. And then that way they've at least gone through the process their first year, if not every year, because things can be different. We all have seen that. But again, we encourage them to fill out the FAFSA because it does get easier after the first year as well. As far as repayment options, when it comes to the federal direct loan programs, repayment options were one of the other things that were streamlined with the new legislation with that OB3. This created new repayment plans. We've got just a few details on the next slide. And again, there's even more detail in the appendix at the very end. But keep in mind that we're going to take a look at those. Repayment plans for federal loans are different for students and parents who have not borrowed previously. Also, a couple of other kind of next big things that we want to look at. The third bullet may not impact most of the high school students if they're going to be attending full time. We just looked at those limits and the annual amounts, and it said that it was for full time enrollment. But institutions, colleges, and universities are now required to make adjustments or prorate the maximum amount for a student who is attending less than full time. So again, most students you talk to, they're going full time. We've got the slides we already showed you. You know what the maximum amount they can borrow each year. If you are talking with a student who is attending less than full time, even if their costs are greater than those annual limits, they are not eligible to borrow up to the maximum. There has to be something called proration. Won't get into the details, but it has to deal with, how much their costs are for less than half-time enrollment. What do those credits look like? They can no longer borrow the maximum annual amount. So keep that in the back of your mind as a ticker. If you've got a student who maybe is working full-time, they're going to be going less than full-time, they have to talk to financial aid about how much they can borrow if they need it, because it's not cut and dry limits that we show on a chart. Okay. And then the last bullet that's important is that colleges and universities can now set lower borrowing limits by program of study. So they can basically identify a program, say that we believe the federal annual maximums are too high. We're going to reduce that for this entire program. Okay, they now have the authority to do that. They can put a lower annual limit in place for a program, but it has to be applied consistently to all of the students that are in the program. It can't be for one of them or two of them that they don't think should borrow. It has to be applied to everybody. And then Ed had talked to you about professional judgment. A school cannot use a professional judgment or a PJ to make one student eligible for more than that reduced annual limit. So we want to mention that because that could impact some students, and it could explain why they have a lower limit than the numbers that we gave you that you've given to them. So again, they have the authority to limit the annual amounts for programs if they choose to. Again, a lot of information, but we just want to get it in your brain and have it on the slide. That way you'll remember, oh, she said something about that. Let's go back and find it. Okay. On the next slide, this slide provides the details for that streamlined or the reduced repayment options for federal loan borrowers. with new loans made on or after July 1st of 2026. Okay, going forward, federal direct loans can be repaid using only two plans shown here. Again, in our appendix, slides 73, 74, and 75, I think it's 75 that talks about all the different options that have been out there historically for federal student loan borrowers, especially for students. There were a lot of them, income-based, income-driven, three different ones. So basically, the government said this is too complicated. So going forward, again, there are only two plans that are shown here. A standard 10 to 20 year fixed repayment plan, and that's a tiered standard. You can get more details in the appendix. And then there's also the repayment assistance plan, or the RAP. Again, more details about that in the appendix as well. Why we want to be sure that we mention this is you'll see in the next couple of bullets that all loans must be paid under the same repayment plan. So that means if I've already borrowed as a student and I had 5 or 6 different options available to me, then I take out a new loan after July 1st of 2026. All of my loans have to have the same repayment plan. All those different ones that I had on my old loans, those options all go away. And I fall into the category of getting only these two that you see on this slide as my way of repaying my loans. Okay. And your high school seniors, they haven't borrowed yet. So no big deal. But again, we're mentioning it because with Parent Plus loans, with the new legislation that was passed, Parent Plus loans can only be repaid under the tiered standard repayment plan. That's it. One option. Standard repayment plan, tiered. The government sets all the levels, and based on this much, this is how long you can repay. That's for new folks who begin borrowing, or if I'm one of those parents where your seniors have siblings that are older, and a parent has already started borrowing Parent Plus loans for those older siblings, again, that's a parent that you want to say, talk to financial aid. Okay. You don't need to get into the ifs, whys, or buts about it, but just be sure they understand that when it comes to borrowing a Parent Plus loan for their high school senior, that if they take out a Parent Plus loan for the high school senior and they've already borrowed for older siblings, that new loan takes away the repayment options that they were talked about and they had available to them on the older loans. They end up with one standard repayment plan for all of their loans. The Parent Plus loans they took out for the older siblings, and then also when it comes to the new parent loan they took out for your high school senior. Again, parents, all federal loans, every borrower can only have one repayment plan in place. And with Plus loans, they only have one option, which is the tiered standard plan. And so basically that means, well, maybe mom has been borrowing for the older sibling and she wants to keep those different repayment options. She was counting on having those different repayment options. Well, now maybe dad needs to borrow for the high school senior. Because again, then he would have one option, tiered standard plan, but mom, if she takes out no new loans after July 1st of 2026, she can keep all the options she had available to her for repayment when she took the loan out. Again, more than a mouthful, and why we kind of say, if you're talking to a family and a parent has already had older kids and they've already started borrowing Parent Plus loans, they need to talk to financial aid. Okay, that's the best advice you can give them. You're not like, just passing it off to somebody else. That is the best advice that you can give to them. Okay, key terms and loans, a couple of other things, some federal loan term changes that are happening. Again, various deferment options are available. We talk about, deferments for economic hardship and unemployment. Again, some of those are going away. There's a little bit more time on these. The changes to deferment options, economic hardship, unemployment, those don't come in effect until July 1st of 2027. So they're available to students in repayment a little bit longer. Forbearances, again, changing that, but that doesn't happen until July 1st of 2027. Military still get special things, special benefits. And then loan forgiveness options, we didn't put much about here on those, and we won't say much because we really don't know for sure what are going to happen to public service loan forgiveness. And then the one thing, as far as the new income-based that RAP repayment plan that we showed you on the last slide. Previously, some of beyond public service loan forgiveness, some of the repayment options that students had available to them, it was based on their income. They would pay so much each year. And at the end of 20 years, if there was still a balance, it would be canceled. With the new RAP, there are no cancellations. Okay, so there won't be any lump sums at the end of 20 years that are going to be forgiven, as there are with the current repayment options that are out there. So again, just a lot of changes when it comes to repayment options. We just wanted to throw it out there in case you get a question. Filling the gap. When we talk about filling that gap through federal Parent Plus loans and private education loans, these slides really just give you information to share with your families to compare the two. Again, FAFSA required on the federal loans. Private education loans don't require it, but the school may say, hey, we want you to fill it out, and we even recommend that students do fill out the FAFSA. Parent always stays the borrower. They're the primary borrower. That never changes. There's a credit check on a Parent Plus loan, but it's not what you think of as a true credit check like it is on the private education loan. It's more a search for adverse credit. The slide tells you a couple of options parents have with a Parent Plus loan if they have adverse credit. On the right-hand side, private education loans, again, bank, credit unions, fintechs that you see online. The student is the borrower. Cosigns are not necessarily required, but they're always strongly encouraged because the student may need a cosigner in order to be approved, or it may help them get a lower rate as well. So again, cosigners always encouraged. Doesn't have to be a parent. At Sallie Mae, about 28% of our loans nationally have cosigners that aren't the parent. So keep that in mind when you're looking at private education loans. If there's not a parent who could be taking out that federal parent loan, there may be an option to find a cosigner, someone other than a parent, to help out a student through a private education loan. There is a credit check. It's a true credit check, but that's different based from lender to lender. Also, there are things called cosigner releases where a student borrower could ask for their cosigner to be released from the loan obligation, but the credit criteria that are looked at, the criteria for those cosigner release options, very greatly different from lender to lender. So students really need to be shopping. They really need to be researching. FICO allows you to apply for multiple loans, just like you do for a car. You can apply for multiple loans within a certain period of time, and it only hits your FICO score once. They want to do the same type of shopping if they're looking at private education loans, because there can be so many differences between the different lenders. Just some more information on the next slide about federal parent loans and private education loans, talks about interest rates, talks about repayment options. All that information is out there. You can take a look at that. Let us know if you have any questions on those. I mentioned earlier there will be a slide that talks about how to apply. Again, federal direct sub and unsub, federal parent loan requires the FAFSA, talks about the MPN, gives you the website, that studentaid.gov that Ed had mentioned a few times. And then it talks about private education loans. Most colleges and universities' websites will have a list of lender. And again, making sure you're shopping around for the best terms. And as long as you're doing it within all the applications within a 2-week window to be safe. Some situations is 30 days, but I always say shop within 2 weeks, do as many applications as you want, look for the best thing out there, and it only counts as one hard hit on your credit. Okay, payment incentives, we mentioned those early on. This slide just gives you some more detail on what those might look like or what those might be. Again, a big thing is auto debit, signing up for that. Auto debit's great. You get the reduction, and then also your payment comes out each month. You don't have to worry about forgetting about it. And this just talks about some of those other repayment incentives that are available. And then the next slide, we talked about origination fees. We did just want to give you an example, just to give you an idea. We say 1.057, we say 4.228. Private lenders don't have, at least most of them do not have any type of an origination fee. We just wanted to put some numbers behind it. so that you could see the difference. We mentioned the 5814 when we talked about the direct subsidized and unsubsidized that the student borrows. Not a whole lot, $58.14. When you start talking about the origination fee on a Federal Plus loan, that 4.228%, that does make more of a significant difference. And we just wanted to show that so that you could share it with parents and that way they can just be aware of what is happening. And that's part of, when they look at interest rates, an APR includes fees that are subtracted. So the APR on a Federal Plus loan is always going to be a little bit higher because of fees, and your private education loans don't have any origination fees on the front end. One last way, as far as tuition payment plans, is filling that gap. And again, this is how I'm going to finish up my discussion, and then Ed's going to show you some of those resources. Schools themselves offer these tuition payment plans to help cover remaining balances. The plans allow you to spread out your payment over time, typically a semester or an academic year. Basically, a lot of them are set up for monthly payments over a certain number of months that are divided by each school rather than making a lump sum payment. These plans have always been a valuable option for families to consider as a way to filling the gap. However, now more than ever, with the changes we just talked about with the Parent Plus loan, I didn't specifically mention it, but I know you have students who are looking at graduate studies beyond getting their bachelor's degree. We talked about the annual limits that are now in place on a Parent Plus loan. In the past, and you'll see on that one slide, it didn't talk about Graduate Plus anymore. That's because Graduate Plus has been eliminated. Again, there are legacy provisions for students who have already started borrowing who are in school. There's a lot of details, more information in the appendix. But for your seniors in high school, they will not have a Graduate Plus loan that they can borrow from when they complete their undergrad and go on to graduate studies. So if they were already aware of it, we're thinking that was the way they were going to pay for med school or pay for law school or pay for their, PT training or, a master's in nursing or education. They need to be aware that the Graduate Plus is eliminated beginning July 1st of 2026. Again, for students who haven't borrowed in the past, and also keeping in mind from the perspective that, the chart we showed has the total direct sub and unsub that can be borrowed. The government basically now has made graduate students and professional students a little bit different. They just need to be aware that there are changes and they want to talk about financial aid. So if you've got that student who has it all figured out, this is where I'm going, this is my undergrad, this is my grad, this is how I'm going to pay for it. If they haven't been listening to a lot of the information that's been out there in the press, on TV, they need to step back, talk to financial aid, understand what options they truly have going forward to pay for graduate or professional education. And there, just as Ed had mentioned, there was a difference now between certain types of PJ, a special condition versus, and I forget the other one, dependency override maybe, but same way now. There are different, very clear, different definitions between a graduate student and a professional student, and how much they can borrow depends upon which category they fall into. So again, they want to talk to financial aid. Even though they're only going into undergraduate right now, they know they want to do graduate studies. They need to understand what they're looking at, what types of maximum aggregate amounts they can borrow so that they're prepared and they know how to handle it at both levels. Okay? And that is everything that I have. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Ed so you can listen to him for the last few minutes that we have together. Thanks
All
so
right.
much, guys.
Thanks, Mel. Thanks so much. So really quickly, gang, we do want to cover the resources, some resources we have for you all that are available to you. So first and foremost, we would encourage you to make sure to get your information into our listserv. So this has a ton of benefits. So this will get you information about any of our workshops, counselor events, announcements and details, and then also additional training. So if you can do so, click on that link, or actually afterwards, go ahead and access that link, and that will allow you that'll allow you to get on our listserv so that you'll have up-to-date announcements as to what's going on with OASPA. We would also encourage you to check out our resource page. So again, the URL is down there. We can also put this in the chat. This includes a lot of great resources for high school counselors and college and career counselors that you can use throughout everything that you're doing with students and families. Melanie had mentioned our FAFSA priority deadline spreadsheet that we keep up to date. So again, a link there. It's also on our counselor resource page that you can go to. And this, we do our best, gang, to keep this up to date, to make sure that we're giving you really accurate information regarding priority deadlines. And in addition, as to when they're going to start sending out financial aid offers. So you can access it there. Keep in mind that we do tend to keep this to 4-year institutions. So there may be, I know in the screenshot, we've got like Columbus State Community College, but realistically, we try to keep it to 4-year institutions. And then some other great resources that you can leverage that we don't have linked directly, but you can access. So College and Financial Aid Comparison Worksheet, the FAFSA Completion Tool by High School, FAFSA Ohio Student Record Data. So that's something that you would need to get access via your superintendent. And then also information on the Financial Aid Toolkit, Ohio EDT program, and Student Aid Identity Theft. Those are all things that are linked out on our counselor resource page that we showed earlier. So lots of great information there. I know it's been a lot, gang. We do have a couple of quick questions, but before then, I do want to thank you all if anybody has to drop. So we did have a couple of quick questions. Can you talk a little bit more about special circumstances regarding grandparents raising kids? Specifically, what's required of them in a student applying for the FAFSA? So realistically, this really falls, like you had alluded to, this falls under the special circumstances. It really depends what that situation is. So if there is no formal, I mean, realistically, grandparent information should not go on the FAFSA. We're always going to be looking for parent information. This would likely fall under a special circumstances situation, or I'm sorry, an unusual circumstances situation. So realistically, if the parent is no longer in the picture, it just really, we got to dig in and we've got to see, why is the parent no longer in the picture? Was there a legal adoption? Was this just is the student was the grandparent issued issued as the permanent guardian for the student? In almost all of these cases, the student would be identified as an independent student, whether it be automatically through the court system or through a unusual circumstances situation. So keep that in mind. Generally speaking, grandparent information should never go onto the FAFSA, but likely we're going to have to dig in a little bit deeper. Similarly, there was a question about students who have been in foster care and they're now adopted. So that really depends on the age of the student. So if they were in foster care on or after the age of 13, even if they have been adopted after that, they are still considered an independent student. That's one of the dependency questions on the FAFSA, is an independent student if they were in foster care on or after their 13th birthday. So even if they've been adopted after their 13th birthday, if they were in foster care at any point in time, 13 and after, they're considered independent. So hopefully that helps. The last question we have, are we able to post some reputable scholarship sites for students to access as they look for scholarships? So I will say this, there are a lot out there. And I would say that the sites themselves, generally speaking, are reputable. I'm dancing around this because I don't know that we really want to give out various scholarship sites because a lot of them are affiliated with third parties, for profits, things of that nature. What I will
Yeah.
say is this: is that anytime you can find a scholarship search site that does not collect any information up front. So if it doesn't require any type of credentialing, so you don't have to set up a username or password, I would gravitate towards those because that'll allow you and the students to search their database without any type of credential. Similarly, anything that is asking for any type of subscription or fee, I would be a little bit leery of. Oftentimes, there are scholarship aggregating companies in which these sites will just candidly they just buy that information off of. So a lot of them are going to be very similar. Um, Keep that in mind. I think those are the two big things for me is just
Yeah.
anything that doesn't require a credential and doesn't require a fee.
Yeah, I would add to OASFA, we had a new website put into place not that long ago. I guess it's been a little while, but everybody's busy and there's a lot going on. And I know we've talked about putting some links out there, and even from the business partners that OASFA works with. So I will take that back to the outreach committee that we need to make that a priority because I know the old site had some things out there, and just moving from one site to another, a lot of that had gotten dropped. So we'll take that back as a priority. And I also wanted to mention on the survey, Ed, since you weren't specifically involved, and unfortunately in the past you were sending out all kinds of emails, but we do have a member on our committee now who's excellent with surveys, and we've automated that. And basically, we were able to send the survey to every institution that's an OASFA member. And it was all automated. We didn't have to manually do anything with it. Just, click, click, and it uploaded it, and it's in the Excel file. So you will see a greater variety than what we historically were able to provide when things were very manual and actually sending of emails back and forth to schools. So the survey process has automated that and has made that form an even better resource than what it had been previously. So there are a variety: Columbus College of Art and Design, the community colleges, Clark State. Edison State, all of those. Anybody who responded is now listed. So I wanted to clarify that as well. So that was an
Very good.
enhancement that you fortunately didn't have to work with this year.
All right. Very good. Well, gang, we don't see any additional questions here, so I did want to remind folks that we did record this session, and the PowerPoint will be available. Both will be available on the counselor resource page on oasfa.org. So usually within about 48 hours. So we should have that posted. Gosh, hopefully, if not by end of business Friday, hopefully early next week. We do want to thank you for your time today. We know it's a lot of information and it's a lot to carve out a couple hours, but we do thank you. We appreciate you, and we sincerely hope that this was beneficial to you. So thank you so much again on
Thanks,
behalf of
everybody.
OASPA. Have a great day, and this concludes our webinar.
Bye, everyone.